Welcome to the Crypto Show, where we're undermining the bank and the man and having some fun while we do it. The Crypto Show started back in 2014, and it was all, mostly Bitcoin related and other, just generally any coin. We were sponsored by Dash for quite some time. But as of the last few years, I've been really focused on privacy coins. And today I've got a really good one. We've got ArticMine, who is part of the development team of Monero, who's going to be talking about O.S.P.E.A.D. And also giving a different perspective on it will be Duke Leto, who is the lead developer with Hush. And that code, of course, goes downline to DragonX. So he's one of the main supporters of DragonX. But as I said, the main topic will be O.S.P.E.A.D. And that's this thing that's been going on for about 4 years, where they've been talking about issues with the privacy of Monero, where the ring signatures have gotten larger, but in reality, they're still smaller. What are the issues with that, and what can be done? So let's get to it.
That I suggest people review Rucknium's GitHub for O.S.P.E.A.D. and it kind of gives an overview, but and also so you go to github.com Rucknium/O.S.P.E.A.D. and that will start by answering your question as to what does O.S.P.E.A.D stands for. The actual term is optimal static parametric estimation of arbitrary distributions, O.S.P.E.A.D, for the Monero decoy selection algorithm.
Yeah, so O.S.P.E.A.D is the fix to the problem. I'd like you, ArticMine, give a, I think a lot of people might be literally hearing about this for the first time ever. There may be like a, just like an average crypto coin user. They're not a developer. Maybe they, they're familiar with different projects. They use the coins. But what's the one sentence synopsis you would say of just what is the problem that O.S.P.E.A.D intends to fix?
Okay, so what we're dealing with here is you have how you select the fake outputs in a ring signature model of Monero. So the essence comes down to you have one real spend, you have 15 fakes or decoys, and then how do you pick those 15 decoys? And what you want to do, your objective is you want the statistical distribution of those decoys that you've chosen to match the statistical distribution of the actual real spends.
Which we find out has not been done, correct?
Which there are some discrepancies. There's an error in the distributions. It's not like there's been various iterations historically on this, and there is a mismatch between the two distributions.
Yes, I would agree to that.
Which is also more weighted towards the more, and we're talking temporal distributions of the output. So how long between an output is being spent after it showed up on the blockchain. And by spend, we have to also include it in a ring. So because this is both, so the spend distribution and then the overall distribution. And then what you're trying to do is in the most recent, because the distribution is quite skewed towards the most recent spends, is where you'll see those discrepancies. And there are statistically measurable discrepancies between the actual distribution of the real spends and the fake distribution. And the issue then becomes, particularly for the more recent outputs, that you can then effectively come up with a probability distribution that the real output is going to come up within a group of about 4 to 5 of the fakes, which is this argument, and this is more pronounced in the more recent, and the ones that, as opposed to ones that have been sitting on the blockchain for a long time, because of this mismatch in the distribution. What O.S.P.E.A.D aims to do, in a very simple way, is to match the two. So you have a distribution of fakes that more closely matches the distribution of the actual spends.
So what we're talking about here is usually it's referred to as the decoy selection algorithm, right?
Correct.
And also the decoy selection algorithm is not a consensus feature, correct? That multiple different selection algorithms exist in the wild. So a wallet can choose its own.
That is correct.
This
is very important. This is not a consensus. This is done at the wallet level.
Okay.
And this is important in some ways because it's not built into the consensus. So wallets can choose different decoy algorithms.
Which is both good and bad, because a wallet could choose to do something dumb and make users of that wallet kind of stand out statistically. Or maybe, certain wallets have good ideas and they do something, better. But from reading Ruckniem's work, there's at least 3 selection algorithms in the wild right now. There's a selection algorithm of Monero core before the recent bug fix for the chain. There was an off by 1 bug, and the chain tip was not calculated correctly. So there's kind of like pre-bug fix and post-bug fix selection algorithm Monero core, and it seems like at least one other exists. Some wallet implementation does their own thing. So does that sound?
That's accurate. That's accurate.
Okay.
The issue that also weigh in mind about wallets doing dumb things. Let's be honest. One of the easiest ways that wallets can actually do dumb things is about poor fee selection, which has got nothing to do with this. And this has been also studied at great length in Monero. So there's a lot of things that wallets can do that a wallet deviates. And one of the reasons why in the recommendations from Ruckniem is that we don't address this without a hard fork.
I agree with that recommendation. I'm an outsider, but I agree with that, because his reasoning is that if you fix this, but only that basically introduces one more selection algorithm in the wild, but you still have these other people using these other selection algorithms, and it doesn't really improve the situation.
It can actually make things worse in certain circumstances.
Yes. Yes.
And so that's the argument that is being made. And then, of course, you get the rather interesting history of this whole thing. Is that this research started in 2021, 2022.
I find it very interesting. As an outsider, I got my popcorn and started reading, Ruckniem's O.S.P.E.A.D GitHub repo. It's like over 100 pages of documentation. There's code, there's data, there's, you guys are really lucky to have someone like Ruckniem with all those statistical skills and studying Monero, because wow, where would we be right now without him?
I mean, basically, he's identified an issue, a problem. This was the research was done. A lot of the history behind this is really interesting, because when originally this research started, the general plan in Monero at the time was to move from a ring 16 to about a ring 64, 128. And the idea was that this was then going to be implemented in conjunction with that upgrade.
That seems reasonable to me. It seems like you would want to do put O.S.P.E.A.D into production when you increase the size and hard fork it, so that old nodes, the old selection algorithms, are not mixing together with this new improved one.
That's essentially what you want to do. And then what happens in the interim is that the discovery of the work done, particularly by Luke Barker, on this question of going to full chain membership proofs, effectively makes to a very large degree, the entire research kind of moot, because essentially what you're doing is you're selecting an algorithm that you're no longer going to be doing decoy selection.
No more statistical privacy, and as someone who works on shielded addresses and kind of zero knowledge proof privacy stuff, I mean, I see it as just extremely logical. Monero's biggest weakness is statistical privacy. It has the adoption It has good user interfaces. It has, the liquidity and the market cap and all those things. But actually, from my humble opinion, the actual biggest issue is,
Well, I would agree with the analysis. It basically compensates to a degree through back volume of transactions and through a combination for that weakness. But that is essentially a very good assessment. It is the weak point.
It's the weak point, and FCMPs are, as an outsider, again, I've been trying to keep up and study. Luke Parker is doing amazing work with a few other people. And it seems that definitely is the future of Monero is FCMPs. I think the whole community is in agreement on that. But the issue is that they are, I think, very reasonably taking their time to do it right and test it and audit it and get lots of eyes on it. They really don't want to push FCMPs to mainnet, and then all of a sudden you find some horrible bug. So now it's kind of like, well, there's no time when we know that FCMPs will be, put onto mainnet. Maybe it's 1-2 years from now. And what is Monero going to do in the meantime to kind of be, plug the hole?
Well, the question is, when is full chain membership proofs going to come in the mainnet?
Yeah.
And the question then becomes there was some discussion at one point of us going to an existing hard fork on existing ring signature technology, maybe throwing the scaling arguments, essentially making them the same size as what FFCP are going to be. And it seems to be a sort of a reluctance in the community to go that route rather just to proceed ahead with the hard fork towards full chain membership proofs. I mean, that seems to be where the community is going. And so it kind of then leaves us in a different position, is how do we as users mitigate this risk now that we know what it is? And what can we do to improve the protection? And I think we're in a bit of an understanding of the issues is important because, for example, it doesn't affect all transactions the same. It has an asymmetrical impact on very recent transactions because that's where the biggest discrepancy in the distribution is occurs. And that has an interesting side effect, which is these are also the transactions that are the most churned. And by that I mean, because one of the easiest ways statistically to defeat blockchain surveillance, and if we even step back from Monero completely and just look at Bitcoin, there are two elements in blockchain surveillance. And one of them is clustering, where you're adding transactions and you combine them together. And that, from the point of view of surveillance, improves the signal-to noise. So you get a more reliable result. The second one is peel chains, where a peel chain is basically where you take an amount and you spend small amounts of it, cast it on peel chain, and with each hop in the chain, your traceability diminishes and your error increases. So this is an important thing to bear in mind when we look at the basics of blockchain surveillance on Bitcoin, that we have essentially the principle that if you add or integrate in statistics, you would improve the signal-to noise, assuming statistically independent data. And if you subtract or differentiate, you actually reduce the signal-to noise, and you end up with more error. So that simple analysis will give you sort of a potential response. So how do I get around the problem? Or very simply, how you get around the problem is you consider increasing your churning activity or your transaction activity, in particularly low-risk transactions, which will in turn defeat any kind of surveillance attack, because now what you're doing is you're adding back, you're essentially churning your way into it. The other thing
I agree with you. I don't mean to interrupt. I'm sensitive to, I think, just listeners that are maybe like, we're not defining some concepts. So churning basically means sending funds to yourself. usually the whole wallet balance, but it could actually be a subset of your wallet balance or even a single output. And that adds a hop in the transaction graph.
It does, but
So my
another way to
question
do it
here would be, is
Yes.
there any kind of criminal liability here where you're trying to hide these transactions? I mean, that you're structuring your shielding? Is this an issue or no?
because of intent. I mean, this is the issue. But where it gets really dicey is suppose what you're doing is you simply is going to a market and buying a cup of coffee. And now you've changed the whole picture, and this is where the whole issue gets. If you simply are looking at your privacy now, and if you're not actively manipulating it, you basically say, "Oh, I'm just going to this market and I bought a coffee, and then 2 hours later I bought a burrito." That is not, that's the kind of thing that actually is better in those respects. So yes, one could argue that they have to prove intent and so on. Now, one of the biggest problems with all of this is that in order to actually, blockchain surveillance has not been tested in the courts. And this is one of the big other issues that we're dealing with, which is an entirely separate issue, particularly with Sterling-off cases and and Bitcoin. In fact, it can fail in Bitcoin in a major way. And so we're dealing with an opponent in many respects that, to be blunt, and this is just from looking at the representations that were made in the court in the Sterling-off case, for example, the public representations that were made with Chainalysis and on behalf of Chainalysis. There's a really strong lack of any kind of mathematical or statistical rigor or scientific rigor in their work.
No, it's a black box. So these chain analysis companies are selling black box software. They cannot scientifically reproduce their claims. They're relying on their own proprietary algorithms, which they have a financial incentive to sell at whatever highest price they can. And yeah, I think that you're right. The chain analysis, that's not even the biggest concern. I think chain analysis doesn't need to be used in courts. It's what leads people on the right path to find other things. In my opinion, sure, there's people that are interested in that, and that's fine. I'm not a lawyer and all that, but chain analysis is really for where to put your resources as an investigator, searching a path, finding out information.
Not even that.
Yeah. So
not even that, because it's very, very easy to manipulate this in order to lead law enforcement on a wild goose chase. And in fact, I would argue even further that with a basic knowledge, a criminal entity could deliberately manipulate this type of blockchain surveillance in order to perpetuate the very crimes that you're trying to prevent. Because what you're doing is essentially you're sending law enforcement on a wild goose chase, and it's surprisingly easy to do. And so the real problem here is that you got a bunch of companies selling essentially what could be considered surveillance snake oil.
Snake oil. I'm glad you used that term because it literally is snake oil,
and they're making a lot of money doing
obscene.
Obscene amounts of money.
Yeah.
And they're not really delivering results. And this is one of the issues that comes with all of this, is that the actual test in the courts is only now starting to come. So ultimately, the court test is going to drive whether law enforcement is going to be effectively using something. And that hasn't happened yet in any significant way. I mean, we've had the Sterling-off case where there was a conviction, but there's considerable questions on appeal. There's actually a video from Thorkland and Michael Hazard on Monerotopia, which I highly recommend. I have not had a chance just to review it. It came out very, very recently on this issue, on their appeal issue and so on, because they can speak a lot more now than they could before. So you're dealing with an opponent that has essentially very little scientific rigor and maybe a very shaky legal ground. So this is important to understand. I
agree with you, ArticMine, but I also feel like that what you're talking about is in the realm of humans and human world in politics and really what these chain analysis companies are. It's like a reputation laundering factory. It's the same thing as a tobacco company funding some scientist to produce research that smoking cigarettes doesn't give you cancer. And then they can point to this thing over there. Hey, look, this scientist, this guy with a PhD, he says everything's cool. So we're cool, right? And it's not very different than that. But also, we're in the realm of technology and code, and I don't know. I don't know what Dan wants, but
we gotta keep our own. We gotta keep our own.
Yes, I have a question about this reduction of the ring signature.
It's Dan's show. Maybe we should let him ask a few questions.
Yes.
Yeah. So, how exactly did it come about that the ring
Only
signature
simple
of
ones?
16
Okay, shoot.
is able to be reduced down to 4.2? I mean, what's the bug or the feature here? What's the issue?
All right. Do you want? Yeah, let's let ArticMine take that. Go ahead.
Well, essentially, what you're saying is when you take the discrepancy between the fakes and the real spends, then you turn around and you get a distribution of errors. Essentially,
you divide them. Let's try to be concrete. I mean, ArticMine, you're an academic. You have,
yes.
I'm an academic, but I also know that most people it's just like the teachers in Charlie Brown. It just becomes gobbledygook when we use too much jargon.
Essentially, what you do is you can end up with 4.2 or somewhere between 4 and 5, basically, what you saw 4 of those potential combination of fakes where the real one is with higher probability than the rest of them. And that's essentially what it is.
So let's stick on Dan's question. Your question is, why does the ring reduce from 16 to 4.2? That's your question, right, Dan? All right.
Because essentially you're prioritizing certain a combination, one group of the fakes plus the real as a location where the real is actually going to be.
ArticMine has answered your question, but let me answer it in different words that maybe helps it make sense to people. So you get this probability distribution. Don't even worry about what a distribution is. Basically, just you have this graph that tells you kind of the probability of something being the real spend, and then you have this other probability graph distribution, whatever you want to call it, and that's the probability of it being the decoy. And what Rucknium did was basically say, if I divide these two things, it tells me the most likely output, one of 16 of the ring members. It gives me the one that is most likely to be the real spend.
Not necessarily. What it says is it is most likely within this group of 4.2.
Most likely within the ring, within that group.
Within the group, as opposed to it. So that's effectively what it does. Now, the other thing that's subtle in here that is not being seen is that this depends to a large degree on the age of the outputs. If your outputs are relatively new, that's when you get this effect, because that's where the biggest discrepancy is. If, on the other hand, you have outputs that are old, that effect is not the same at all.
But people don't control their, like, for instance, if I'm Alice and I'm spending some funds in my wallet, I don't have control over what the selection algorithm chooses. It's gonna choose whatever the wallet software developers, made the algorithm. It's gonna choose some collection of outputs. Some of them will be old, some of them will be new. I'm pretty sure that the distribution skews to use newer ones more often than older ones, but
you do have control over how frequently you do your spend, which effectively controls the risk.
But doesn't that increase your risk? Because if I'm Alice and maybe I don't fully understand the details, but I want to try to do something, I might think that, let's say, churning my balance every hour helps. And that's actually, I don't know if I would agree to that, because then all of a sudden you're making all of your your outputs very new. You're making them newer by definition because you have to spend outputs that came from an old block height, and now you're making them come from a new block height. So you're by definition making them all newer, which what you're saying is it makes makes this attack works better on newer outputs. And you're also linking together outputs. So for instance, if there was, if you receive payments from multiple different places, different entities.
There we're getting into the key point that you're going to watch. And this is where the whole issue, where we're talking between linking or clustering and just making a peel chain. And the distinction is important. But the thing to understand is this. If you start doing spans on a peel chain, on outputs with an effective ring of 4, by the time you do 2 of them, you're already ahead of the ring of 16. So what happens is, in many respects, is that the outputs that are newer, which is the most vulnerable, are also the ones that are being spent rapidly, are benefiting from the peel chain effect. So in a sense, you're actually targeting the attack works where there's more compensating factors. That's what I would say in this. You have to take it. The other thing that happens is when you spend an output, then you increase the probability that it gets included in a ring. Because there's the other issue that you people don't realize is that if you just do nothing, you spend an output and do nothing, that output ends up in rings. So what I'm saying is that if you sort of relax a bit and say, I'm just going to continue using Monero normally, you may actually be doing the best thing for yourself.
I agree with you there that I think that the average user who knows enough to install a wallet and make transactions, I don't know that they have the knowledge to churn, to do churning and try to increase. Like, they're not increasing the privacy. They're probably accomplishing nothing and spending a little bit in fees, but there's the process that I feel like they can hurt their privacy, especially if they try to do this churning in a very deterministic way. Like, I'm going to churn at 9 a.m. every Monday or something like that.
That you don't want to do. You don't want to create a frequency spectrum.
Yeah, but we know that we're developers, but go ask the average, crypto coin user. They have no clue what timing analysis is. So that's why I say churning. At first, I did think churning was a good thing to tell people, and the more I looked into exactly what churning accomplishes with Monero, I actually changed my own opinion, and I said, for the average user, don't churn unless you really know what you're doing.
My opinion on the subject, honestly, is what you want to avoid is ghost spans at this point in time.
So here's the thing, though. When Alice spends some Monero and buys a burrito, she doesn't know if she's actually spending 2 outputs or 10 or only 1. See, like when you're talking about a peel chain, that's when you spend 1 output and that output was bigger than the amount you're trying to send right now. So you didn't have to link together multiple outputs. You could just spend
what I'm saying is if you consolidate all your small little outputs into 1 output,
yes,
and then you force the peel chain, and at that point in time,
but by consolidating, you're linking together potentially output.
No, but here's where it gets interesting. If you consolidate everything into 1 output, and then are willing to wait the half an hour or 2 between spends, then you could create a really, really long peel chain. So from a privacy perspective, if you and then if your spends are not the ones that you're worried about, that's where you can actually build your privacy. So if you consolidate your outputs and you're simply just using it normally and not worrying about it, in that situation, as you travel further and further down the peel chain, and you're not doing it on a temporal frequency, and you're just using it without worrying about it, that's where you actually will get the biggest privacy benefit.
But what are we actually telling? What is the advice? What is the 1 sentence of advice that we tell a Monero user?
To the average Monero user,
someone that is not using the command line, someone that is using a GUI wallet, that they don't understand the intricacies of blockchain analysis. What is the one sentence? Here's what you do. But I want to hear what your take is.
Keep using it as if nothing had happened. Actually, that is your best option.
Okay.
Especially when you're dealing with transactions that are not particularly sensitive. That's your simplest, best option. Because don't try to manipulate it and this and that and whatever.
I agree with you that most people will try to manipulate it. And if you try to manipulate anything and not understand it deeply, you may be making it worse for yourself. So
I agree with you. I agree with you. So rather than do that, basically just use it normally.
I agree. I'll say my first order term of error is to agree with you, but then I have a second order term where I'm like, so I want to explain, I actually really tried to think myself, I'm interested in this technically, the code, the statistics, the math, but most people just they're not interested in that. They're interested in having privacy and using Monero to buy whatever they want to buy. So I thought to myself, what is the actual is there any simple advice to give? So ArticMine, I came up with something. I didn't read it anywhere. I didn't take anyone else's idea, but I came up with my own thing and I want to hear your feedback. Okay. So the really, the high level is, I agree with you. My first order term is, if you're just buying burritos and coffee and you're just using Monero and you don't think someone is trying to, trace you or whatever, then I agree with you. You probably just keep doing what you're doing. But if you think that, I might be a little interesting and someone might be, trying to de-anonymize me, someone's trying to trace my transactions, I feel like having defining an incoming wallet and an outgoing wallet. And what I mean by that is, you're now going to use two wallets. You're going to only allow incoming transactions to one wallet, and you're only going to make transactions out of your outgoing wallet. You never have a third party. You never give out an address to a third party of your outgoing wallet, and you always have funds coming in the incoming wallet. And the only time you ever send funds out of incoming is to top up and add funds to your outgoing wallet. And what that does is it always adds a chain hop, no matter what. So even if you're a low sophistication user, and for instance, you're withdrawing from an exchange and then sending it back to them, which, there's various attacks where the statistics are not good. It used to be 1 out of 16 that they could tell that this is the same thing they sent you, and now with Rucknium's research, it's 1 out of 4.2. So by using two wallets, one incoming, one outgoing, it's kind of taking your ideas, but instituting kind of an operational security, algorithm, OPSEC.
I would agree with that strategy, although I'd modify it slightly. I'll tell you what I would do.
Sure.
If what you would do is, first of all, if your incoming transactions are KYC.
Oh yeah, that's bad.
Okay, that goes into your incoming wallet.
Yes.
Okay? Now, if you then want to also do an outgoing transaction that's KYC, because, for example, you want them to back to the same exchange, then that's where you would use your incoming wallet and turn around and spend back to the exchange, because you actually want them to trace you, at least to have some chance of tracing you. So actually, ironically, there are some odd situations where you actually want them to trace you. Now, then when you go into your spends that you want to protect privately, then what you can do is you can have maybe 3 separate inputs that you're going to spend to, or for whatever, and then you keep topping up those individually if you're really concerned about the if you really are concerned about the frequency, like doing spends within half an hour, I think. If not, just use one, which is actually easier. And then what you do basically in that situation is, if you use it for both your sensitive and non-sensitive spends, you're going to create a very long Beal chain, and once in a while you're going to have a cluster. But if your outputs are done inputs relatively infrequently, then you're forcing the thing to basically one input type transactions all the time. And that is where you're going to get the benefit of the Beal chain.
But let me ask you something, because I'm actually not familiar with most Monero wallets. How many Monero wallets actually give you coin control, where you can actually see and maybe decide which inputs you're spending? Is that, to my knowledge, that's not a very common feature.
No, it's not. But what you can do is you can basically send, for example, all your inputs into one A.D address all the time.
That is, I think, a good idea. I haven't looked at a lot of different Monero wallets, but the Monero full node, it has a command to do that. It has the sweep command, right? Sweep all and sweep single. But I don't think most wallets make it easy to sweep all your funds. You'd kind of have to, see your balance and try to spend an amount just under that.
Just use sweep all your funds to one address. It's actually a very simple way of consolidating it. And then
with the full node, it is. But have you seen that feature in like a mobile Monero wallet or a GUI wallet? I'm not talking about the like Monero GUI desktop wallet. Most people use mobile wallets, for better or worse. I don't think it's a great idea, but. Yeah, people are using Cake, they're using Edge, or they're using Monero, or I don't know how to pronounce it. And I don't think they provide a sweep command. I'm not sure about Cake, but yeah, they should. Okay, so maybe in response to this Rucknian research, GUI wallets should.
A sweep command would be very, very helpful in this.
Okay.
And I tend to be someone that basically primarily is using for a Monero wallet on a laptop, at least for the bulk of my Monero. And so
I understand that, but like when we're talking about Alice buying a burrito, she's doing that on her phone. Like, it's very rare. I'm going to just go ahead and say that of all the people using Monero to buy coffee and soap and burritos, they're using a phone, or maybe a tablet.
Yeah. No. So that is true.
So I think this is actually a good point we've just figured out, is hopefully somebody from these various GUI wallets is listening to this and hopefully either came up with it as their own idea or now is realizing with this Rucknian research, mobile wallets, especially GUI wallets in general, they should have a sweep command that makes it easy to sweep all funds to a new address. And that's a generally useful feature, even if you're just trying to migrate off a certain wallet or, move all the funds to a totally different device or wallet. But now we see it's actually useful, like, for your privacy.
I mean, basically the sweep command can be a very powerful tool for privacy, because effectively what it does is it creates the Beal chain.
So now, Dan, did we answer your question?
Okay. The downside to this, and I will give you the downside to this, is you're going to have to wait the half hour between transactions. That's the downside.
Why is it a half an hour? Is it 20 minutes? Is it 10 confirmations at 2 minutes?
10 confirmations. Yeah, 10 confirmations. You got to allow some time, but 20 minutes is the theory, but there's a bit of a delay because of Dandelion. So
okay.
Yeah, so
you're right.
That's the ballpark figure. But you want to have to wait for the 10 confirmations if you want to maximize your privacy. It's the simplest way to do it. And then you sweep everything into one transaction. You wait the 10 confirmations to maximize your privacy, and then the burritos will give you a lot of privacy.
I mean, everyone is forced to wait those 10 confirmations. There's no way to spend funds before 10 confirmations in Monero. Is that correct?
Unless you split them up. And this is one of the reasons why this other problem can be addressed through full chain membership proofs, because the way you avoid the 10 confirmations is you basically have multiple inputs. So you spend one, you split them up until you spend one and then get changed by another. So you can do more transactions frequently, but then one is still confirming you can spend on the other inputs. I mean, yes. That's how you get around that, which is the change element. But the downside is you do open the door to clustering. So,
Well,
so
some
there's a
Monero
privacy trade-off.
wallets. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, ArticMine.
Yeah, so there's a trade-off here. You're trading off the convenience of not having to wait for the privacy. Realistically, that's what you end up doing.
Well, one thing I know is that some Monero wallets actually try to deal with this problem. So, for instance, a big user interface problem with Monero is you're at a conference or whatever. Someone sends you some Monero. Oh, you have some in your wallet, you're happy, you go spend it, you buy coffee, but you only had one output to spend, and now you're waiting 20 to 30 minutes to be able to make another transaction. I know some Monero wallets will actually basically create multiple outputs, more than 2 outputs, so that you're always creating a few extra outputs to spend, so you're not left in a situation of having only a single output and then you have to wait 20 to 30 minutes between making transactions. So
is it really a good idea to go ahead and create all of these smaller transactions so that you can spend much faster? And what's the risk? What is the risk to all that?
But basically, what you're doing, you're trading off. There's a trade-off here, and the trade-off is: you want a really long bill chain, or do you want the convenience of not waiting? That's essentially what the trade-off is. So again, if I may say, yeah. So what you want to do is then look at your risk model. Is that really a risk model for you or not? At that point in time, with that type of transaction, what you're doing.
I'm curious, what is the total supply right now of Monero?
What do you mean the ballpark? Do you mean the
total supply? I'm no expert, but I think it's 18 million-ish, right?
Yeah, it's just it's a constant supply for the emission of 0.6 Monero per block. That's not going to change.
Yeah, but he's talking about what is the current circulating supply. That's what he's asking.
A little over 18 million.
Yeah.
So FCMPs are only going to be able to fix all the transactions going forward. What about the ones that already have happened?
Correct.
Are they just out there floating around in this 4.2?
Oh yeah, no. The idea is that you migrate everything to the FCMP, so it's going to go back all the way, because essentially what's going to happen is, as the wallets are upgraded to full chain membership proofs, transactions, even the in the clear transactions, before are going to be, if you migrate that wallet, those transactions will be migrated to that format.
So here's my question. I think I know what Dan is asking. Go ahead, Dan. Ask your question.
Yeah, so the transactions that have already happened, they're all on the blockchain. They're there for good. Now, how are you shielding this? I mean, how is FCMPs going to go backwards and hide the past?
Well, what would happen is if you have, for example, an old transaction, say before 2017, and you upgrade it, you basically are migrating it to another address or to another output. So effectively, what it would see is that's being spent somewhere else into the FMPC pool.
I think I kind of know what Dan is trying to hint at. Can you? Yeah. Do you think so? So right now, at least in Hush, DragonX, Zcash world, we have these things called anonymity sets we study, and basically, this is it's similar to the ring size, but really it's a chain wide, ring size. It's because the way of Z addresses work. So my question, I think I've answered it for myself, but I'm not sure. So I want to hear your expert opinion. Okay. When FCMPs are on mainnet and someone makes the first FCMP transaction, is that a new anonymity set? Like it doesn't, like,
no, FCMPs. The FCMPs, they're essentially inheriting the entire anonymity set of the ring CT transactions.
So it inherits the whole chain, like the whole history of all the rings.
But not the whole chain. There's a bunch of earlier transactions who are in the clear, and those would have to be spent.
Okay,
So what happens
all right,
is
that makes
actually,
sense.
so you have to migrate the outputs. You want to migrate it out, and this is why. But it can be essentially what can happen is someone has a bunch of these old outputs, and then they upgrade to an FNCP wallet, and it'll migrate it over.
So it's going to send those funds to a new address that uses FCMP, and the old outputs will be spent. And do those kind of outputs still get spent, or are they assumed to be mostly lost funds?
No, they're not lost funds. All those outputs are spendable.
I'm saying that they're spendable, but it's like if someone hasn't spent a Monero output from, I don't know, 8 years ago, I mean, what's the likelihood that it's lost? What's the likelihood that the person's dead?
That's another question. But essentially, those outputs can be legally spent on the chain, and will be
of course. You don't want to delete people's money. That's a general.
So that's basically what it is. If somebody decides to update the wallet, it would migrate them. In the existing wallets, it won't be migrated, and I think that's one of the. I've actually pointed that out. That they weren't migrated. So when we went to Ring CT, the existing outputs were not migrated. So unless the person physically went and spent them, they weren't migrated. And the new wallets will be migrating all these old outputs if the wallet is open into those outputs.
So that's interesting. Okay, that's good details. That wasn't clear to me as an outsider trying to understand all the ramifications of the FCMP. But so, for instance, here's kind of an edge case. So I can imagine the situation where a Monero user upgrades their wallet, and now this wallet knows about FCMP. So the wallet is actually kind of automating that procedure of moving the funds. But what happens to, like, let's say a paper wallet? Those are still going to be.
What's on the paper wallet is likely going to be a set of keys that was stored to access that keys are still going to be. The wallet is still going to be there because it's still going to give you.
It's still going to be there, but what I'm saying is that there's no way to automatically migrate those funds, because what if it's written on a piece of paper?
What's on the piece of paper basically would be, in that situation, would be the recovery keys.
So what you're saying is, if I have a paper wallet of Monero, and let's say FCMPs are live, when I import that paper wallet to my new upgraded Monero wallet that supports FCMPs, it's going to migrate the funds to the new system.
It will migrate the funds, but your keys could still be valid unless you move it to another set of keys.
Okay.
This is what I'm getting at. So a paper wallet essentially just gives you a set of keys to recover your private spend keys.
Yeah, I think you answered the question. Just so to be clear, so the anonymity set of FCMPs does not start from zero. That is what you're saying, right?
Not even close. It's going to be about 90% or so of the anonymity set of Monero right now.
I think that is something that is not, obviously if you're a Monero core developer, maybe that's just obvious, or if you're Luke Parker, but that was actually not clear to me. So I'm glad that you
and the reason is because it's the same type of proof. It's essentially that, yeah.
Yes. Go ahead, Dan.
So when FCMPs do start, is that like a new branch, just like with Zcash, where it goes from, sprout to sapling? How do you get the anonymity set from the beginning? Does it use all that, or what?
Well, it's more like, if you look at Monero, the most traceable transactions, it's not this 4.2 thing. Where the real big privacy gain occurred in Monero is when we went to Ring CT to confidential transactions, which you take the transaction amount out of the equation. That's where the big change occurred, and that's in 2017. So that's where the big anonymity set changed. And what is still, and I believe, and I'm quoting from memory on this, but I believe it's somewhere around less than 10% of the Monero is still in these pre-2017 transactions.
Okay, that's good to know.
So what you're really starting off your anonymity set would be with the existing shielded anonymity set of Monero. By shielding, I'm referring to Ring CT transactions.
All right.
So whenever you migrate from the old ones.
Let me answer Dan's question. So I'm much more familiar with how things work in Zcash protocol world, and so I would say FCMPs are pretty different than, for instance, when Zcash created a new type of shielded address. Like, so there's the original one called Sprout. It had really bad problems, inflation bugs. They had to get rid of it. And when they started there's actually two newer ones. But when they start a new one, it's a anonymity set, starts from scratch. It does not inherit the anonymity set of other things.
That was one of the big, that's a huge difference. And it's a very good point. That's one of the big differences of full chain membership rules. It's because you're not radical, you're still keeping the same transaction structure.
That makes me even more excited to see FCMPs because, I'm just trying to understand them as an outsider and reading Luke's stuff and trying to keep up with all the stuff. And I was like, it sounds great, but man, if the anonymity set starts at 0, that's it's a tough pill to swallow. But you're saying that's not the case. That's awesome. That's great. Luke is obviously knows what he's doing.
There's a subtlety here. I'll tell you what it is. If you want to use the full ability of the view keys, etc., you would have to migrate. So there's certain features of FNCP that would not necessarily go through. The anonymity set will. But for example, the full view key, I believe you need to migrate.
Okay, cool. Dan, I hope we answered your question. What's your next question, Dan?
Yeah, so one of the biggest criticisms that I'm hearing is that this went on for 4 years. Why didn't they bring it out sooner if they knew that this was an issue, these 4.2 transactions, for 4 years?
Well, I would argue there was some discussion about that. I think it didn't, to be honest, and I'll tell you why, because the blockchain surveillance companies basically weren't even looking at this stuff. The concern is, and it's a very legitimate concern. The concern is that the blockchain, we were doing their work for them, basically. And the evidence would show that, in fact, it was probably a good idea to keep it secret because they obviously haven't done it. I'm not in favor of that.
It's a very hard problem. I will say, as a developer of a crypto coin software, it's actually very hard calculus to decide, should this knowledge be immediately publicized? Does that hurt more than it helps? And there's some middle ground. There's some middle ground of time where I understand and think it was a good idea that Monero kept it secret in the very beginning. That's very reasonable. They had to study the problem. They had to know exactly what they were dealing with. I think at the point of more than a year or so, then it becomes like, okay, I don't know if it should have been 3.5 years, but I get that once you've kept it secret a year, that's the inertia to just leave it alone and keep it that way.
It wasn't only until the full research was out that it's fully revealed, and quite honestly, I mean I don't think these blockchain surveillance companies they're probably researching this stuff themselves right now.
We're helping them right now. No, they study us. Let's be real, ArticMine. Okay, there's a lot of charlatans and people that kind of just take the work of the actual open source developers and we're leading them to the water, right? So I think that's a very reasonable take. But also, I'm not going to name specific names, but there's various agencies that have 3 letters in them, and I don't pretend that I am smarter than everyone there and have the billions of dollars of resources of those places. So I think that if Rucknium found this 3.5 years ago, and he's just one lone researcher that's interested in statistics, I mean, I think it's highly likely that some 3-letter agency has known this since the very beginning, since long before Rucknium decided to look into it. And, that's a theory. But
I think if you look at the record of what the 3-letter agencies in the United States have been doing, is they've been contracting it out to these blockchain surveillance companies.
That's the public knowledge. That's the public knowledge. But
I mean, it's possible that they know. I would argue that you could argue that's the case.
Well, I think that you're right about the lowest level agencies. Like if you're talking, I'm not interested in naming names and all that, but I think everyone can understand that there's a hierarchy and there's some 3-letter agencies that have a lot more skills and researchers and cryptographers and money than others. And so, yes, the lowest level, sure, of course, they don't have a in-house, data center, and they don't have a team of cryptographers. Sure, they're outsourcing this to chain analysis companies, but then you get above those, and those people, they have in their entire own chain analysis division, a wing in a building somewhere where it's all private, that's never shared with anyone, and they're studying every blockchain out there and studying it and keeping it secret. I think people are crazy to think that that's not happening. That's my humble opinion.
No, I'm not saying it's not happening. I mean, it's you don't know. That's basically your answer. You really don't know.
We don't know. We're coming. Well, we're actually well past an hour. I can stay on a little bit longer because I'm actually really enjoying talking to ArticMine.
Can you explain so a Solana user could understand what are the best practices for protecting your privacy?
Wow, I don't even know what that actually means. Is that like is that where like meme coins reign king? Like, is that what's going on? Okay. I'm actually completely oblivious to that whole world. Like, I don't know if I have one useful thought about Solana. So maybe ArticMine.
I don't know much about it, actually, to tell the truth. So I'm in the same situation.
We're both in the same situation.
Then just the simplest best practices.
Well, I think we've kind of answered it, but probably in too much detail. I think that ArticMine's answer, which is just keep doing what you're doing, is probably correct for, let's say, 80% of Monero users that are just buying coffee and burritos and soap and doing whatever they're doing and using the circular economy. Then you have maybe the 20% or less of users that are like, I'm worried about being interesting, and I think someone's trying to de-anonymize me. I think that, some of these ideas that ArticMine is saying, with my idea of using multiple wallets, like don't put all your eggs in one basket. Like,
I like the multi-wallet solution. Actually, I like the multi-wallet solution that Duke has proposed. I mean, I like that a lot.
So I did. I tried to document this as simply as I could. So I very rarely write stuff, but this vulnerability in Monero, this O.S.P.E.A.D stuff, has gotten me out. I didn't write anything for 2 years, but I wrote something about this and this 2-wallet. I don't know what a good name for it is. A 2-wallet dance is my jargon.
I would suggest that 2-wallet approach is a very good one.
Okay, so yeah.
I don't know about Cake Wallet, but I know that the Edge wallet does allow you to make multiple wallets of the same.
Yes, any good wallet should be able to do it. Monero, I know, does it. My guess is probably Cake does it too, but I don't know. But this question is actually really good. What is like a Solana user or whatever? Really what they're asking is like, explain it like I'm 5, like they don't care about statistics. They don't even want to know what the word ring CT means. Like, they just want privacy. I get that. It's not what we do as people that are kind of interested in going into the guts of the tech. But so I have written about this 2-wallet approach. I think it actually is pretty decent for people. We'll figure out how to get it out there so more people can use it. But I wrote something about it on duke.hush.is. By the time this video comes out, it'll be there publicly linked. But yeah, and I wrote it out as like 4 rules. I tried to make it as simple as possible. Rule 1 is only accept incoming money to the incoming wall. Rule 2 is only send funds out to other people from your outgoing. And then, only send funds, whenever you need more money in your outgoing, that's when you send funds out of your incoming wall. It's like the bridge between. It's not perfect.
I would add an extra rule there, and that is if you're using for your incoming wallet KYC, use the incoming wallet to exit back into KYC.
That I think that's interesting. I was trying to avoid complexity and coming up with just a handful of rules. But you're right. You're right that many or most people are unfortunately using KYC, especially people that are trading, traders that are just, speculating on price, and they are constantly.
I'm going to have to take a quick break here, just if we're going to continue, if that's okay.
Yeah, go take a quick break, and
I'll be back. Okay.
Yeah, me and Dan can shoot the mierda. Are we allowed to say curse words here? What's going on? We're on the internet. All right. So, I'm sure. Here's my take, Dan. I don't know. People either have no idea who I am, which is awesome, great, I love that, or they probably think that I am very biased and, maybe have some agenda or whatever. But actually, my latest agenda, I'll just tell everyone, I think that everyone should have privacy. I think it is a human right. People should have the right to privacy. And it's kind of childish for all these privacy coins it's not productive and kind of childish in a not a positive way for privacy coins to constantly fight with each other and spend all this energy fighting.
By the way,
I'm totally guilty of it. And anyone who is in the camp of people that know who I am, they probably, they have various opinions about me. So yes, I think people can change. And so, I'm not here saying Monero's garbage, Monero's crap, Monero is dead. This new vulnerability is completely annihilates Monero privacy. Like, I don't think that is a correct take. And what the real benefit that any of us can have is, can we give average users some nugget of knowledge that helps them in their daily privacy? And so that's why I was interested to write about this. That's why I did a bunch of research and tried to come up with what is just some very reasonably simple thing that you can tell users. That's how I came up with this 2-wallet approach. And obviously it can be extended. Like, if you're really, really, into OPSEC and doing complex things, you can use more than 2 wallets. But going from 1 wallet to 2 increases your privacy.
Oh, definitely does. I mean,
we just did a show in Acapulco about this very thing with ArticMine and a Komodo dev named Shosane.
One of my big fans, I hear.
So ArticMine was talking about how he added multiple transactions into his wallet so he would have all these extra outputs and it would, make his transactions faster. And Shosane had said that one of the issues with the Zcash wallets is that they have to go back to the old birthday, so it takes so long for them to load. So what he does is send himself a transaction to his wallet before he goes out, to his mobile wallet, so that when he gets there, it, updates from a much newer birth date. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think he's probably using multiple outputs so that he has the one problem is if you only have one output to spend, no matter what coin you're using, you have to wait a certain number of confirmations for the change to be available to be spent. So I think he's probably he's sending funds to himself, but he's sending it to multiple of his own addresses. And then he has multiple outputs to spend. So he can spend one and then immediately spend from another without waiting for the change from the other transaction.
I mean, this is where you would say, I'm going to have, say, instead of in my output wallet, I'm going to have like multiple addresses that I can spend to. And so you don't consolidate them, but you just keep adding to the.
My recommendation, and also as well, is that I believe in stealth addresses, the sub addresses, the addresses that start with an 8 for people that are trying to follow along. Yeah. And I don't in Zcash world, Zcash protocol coins like Hush, DragonX, Zcash, Pirate, all those, they never give out the main wallet address, which is the Monero address that starts with a 4. They never even show that to a user. It's actually almost impossible to look at it unless you write custom code. And that's kind of because there are some theoretical attacks where if something is not right, if there's a bug or something like that, there's a way to, it leaks information to know the master primary address. I'm not saying that's the case, but it's like a defense in depth. It's like wearing belt and suspenders. I don't like that people give out that 4 address. I don't think it's a great idea. So my advice was to always create a new 8, a new stealth address for incoming transactions, and always give a different entity a new address. That means you get lots of outputs in different addresses.
That is also related to the question of forward secrecy with respect to with quantum attacks.
Oh man, quantum attacks are a whole nother show. I'm actively,
because if you reveal the public key, you don't want to reveal the public key, and you could protect against certain types of attacks. There's some low-hanging fruit there in that particular area.
Let's just tell people that let the weirdos, let the crypto coin developers and the cypherpunk weirdos worry about quantum computers. They are very worried, but basically Bitcoin itself and no cryptocurrency right now is quantum safe. No one is, all right? And yes, there's a lot of details, but just like right now we're worried about basic statistics hurting the privacy of Monero user, that anyone with a $100 computer can run these statistics and figure out these things. So it's like we need to spend a lot of time fixing the classical computer attacks before, yes, I think people should be worrying about quantum stuff, but those are worries that we're going to have 5-10 years down the road, at least. And right now
I would say to that is it's a low-hanging fruit you can pick on the quantum stuff.
Yeah, I mean, don't don't publicize your pub key, but the average user really doesn't know what that means. So
I understand what you're saying, but what I'm saying is there are things you can do relatively easy now at the development level.
Okay, yeah, sure, yeah, but
actually harvest some of this low-hanging fruit.
And just as someone that if something is easy to do and might help you in the future, why not do it, right? So to me, don't tell people to give out their Monero address that starts with a 4. It's just not a good idea in general, and then especially maybe with quantum computers and things. Just don't do it. Like, just give out your 8, give out your stealth sub addresses. It's less theoretical metadata leakage to only have a sub address versus the master address. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, this is where this starts coming into this so-called low-hanging fruit that you can harvest.
So yeah, and one thing that I think is interesting for people to know, just for quantum computer safety and stuff, Bitcoin is the canary in the coal mine. All right, we're actually in a great position as developers of other coins, because it's going to be Bitcoin that's attacked first by quantum computers, and that's because there's all these outputs sitting in Bitcoin history, 50 Bitcoin outputs from the original miners, and they all publish their public key directly to the blockchain. So that is the number one first thing that quantum computers will attack, because to calculate one thing, discrete logarithm, just ignore whatever that means, calculate one thing and you get 50 Bitcoin, all right? So it's kind of like, I'm pragmatic about quantum computers. Yes, one day they will cause us problems, but we are going to know. We're going to know when that day arrives, and the Bitcoin people are doing a lot of research. Actually, there is an active BIP that has a new quantum safe signature algorithm that they're going to somehow put on mainnet. But I'm more worried about I'm more worried about the basics right now for privacy points.
I agree with you. I mean, I'm just simply saying that if the low-hanging fruit is there, let's harvest it.
Yeah, harvest the low-hanging fruit. Totally, I'm on board there. Dan, do you have more questions, or what's your vibe?
Can you talk about that Samurai wallet approach? How they're using Bit
I mean, I don't want to make anyone stay longer than they have. I think I'm okay for a little while longer. I want to ask ArticMine just another.
I'm open.
Okay.
I'm open to stay
All right.
for some time, so I'm fine.
So ArticMine, something unique that we do in Hush Dragon X world is actually we hide the number of outputs of every transaction. And the way we do that is to basically pad the number of outputs of every transaction. So for instance, Zcash is, protocol is pretty nice. Shielded address is pretty nice. You hide the amount and you hide the address from the blockchain. That's really awesome. But one of the metadata leakages is you can see how many people you're transacting with. So if Alice sends a transaction to 5 people, that's very noticeable. The same to do with Monero. If you send a transaction that has more than 2 outputs, that stands out. All of a sudden you're not in the crowd, because almost every transaction is sending to one person with some change. And then rarely you'll spend something exactly and you will only have 1 output with no change. But is anyone in Monero looking at?
Well, it has been done at one point. I mean, for example, we have eliminated 1 output transaction, so you're padding 2 outputs right now.
Okay, that I wasn't sure about that. So that's actually
so that was because that's one of the biggest distributions, and there's been some discussion. In fact, quite a bit of discussion with full chain membership groups that we're going to limit the total number of possible outputs that you have.
That's probably a good idea. Is anyone thinking about padding the outputs further? Like maybe what would happen if you made every transaction have like 3 or 4 outputs? Because I know from a chain analysis perspective, all of a sudden you break the kind of assumption that every output is, there's 2 outputs. One is the actual real output and the other is the change. And it's like you follow the chain, right? But
but you have to guess correctly the change. And this is where blockchain surveillance fails. They don't get the change right all the time.
Right. For instance, in Bitcoin, it's deterministic. Like the very first output is almost always the receiver, and the second output, because there's an ordering to outputs. It's not like an unordered list. It's an ordered list, and the second output is the change. That was actually the case in Zcash protocol. And so I've been involved in Zcash protocol for a while now, and I've seen Zcash make mistakes. And I don't like a lot of things that the for-profit company behind Zcash do things. So when I, did stuff in Hush and Dragon X, I actually changed that. I made it a non-deterministic shuffle. So not only do you not just only create 2 outputs on average, it actually shuffles them. So you don't know the ordering anymore. You don't know that the first one is the real output and the second is the change. And we also pad it out so that there's 8 on average. There's usually 8 outputs, and that was chosen because very few people will make a transaction that has more than that. Basically, only mining pools will ever send to a huge number of outputs.
In Monero, one of the discussions was to limit it to 8. Period.
8's a good number. So what I'm getting at is you could, if for instance, just theoretical thought experiment, Monero might not have to increase their ring size so high in the near term if they did something where maybe they're creating 2 dummy outputs for every transaction, and now all of a sudden blockchain surveillance companies, they have multiple different chains to look at, and half of them don't go anywhere.
I think what you're going to get here happening, and I'll tell you what I think is going to happen, is that what's going to happen is that a lot of this stuff is going to be added on at the same time as full chain membership groups. Because essentially what happens is you got a hard fork. It's the same thing with O.S.P.E.A.D. I mean, if we're going to do an interim hard fork where we would increase the ring size and then add O.S.P.E.A.D and then do a scaling stuff and all that at the same time. But that's not where I think the project is going. What's going to happen, I suspect, is that a lot of this stuff will be introduced with full chain membership.
But I mean, that seems like what's in the interim. I mean, if it's 2 years until FCMPs is activated on mainnet, I'm just pulling that out of the air. It could be one. It could be 18 months.
This is where it gets interesting, because if it looks like it's going to be longer, then I think it's going to be a movement for doing an interim hard fork.
I think that Monero should do an interim hard fork. Like I don't know what all the internal dialogue is, but I think it's a bad idea to rush the development of FCMP. That's a bad idea, to feel like the fire is on your heels and you have to get FCMP out yesterday, which I'm sure some developers already think that, but it's not a good situation to be in. So there should be a hard fork in the interim, like sometime in the next 6-ish months, there should be some kind of hard fork, right?
FCMP is right now at the audit stage. It's going into the audit stage right now.
It is. I'm not saying 2 years to try to be down. Like,
I recognize the point. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I recognize the point that depending on what your timeline,
a hard fork has to be
for an interim hard fork. There could be a case be made for an interim hard fork. So it turns out that the full chain membership proofs is going to be 2 years. I would agree with that.
I think that's a conservative estimate. It might happen sooner, but I know that even if every line of code was written and audited tomorrow, hard forks require a lot of coordination and setting a block height and telling the world that there's a mandatory update.
But that also applies for the interim hard fork. That's the issue.
It does, but just changing the ring size to a higher number, that's way less risk than adding this completely new technology, FCMPs.
Oh no, I understand that, but what I'm saying is so like I said, a lot of the commentary is right now that we're going straight forward. It'd be very interesting to see what the commentary is, and I certainly take your input. I mean, don't get me wrong.
I'm an outsider, and
it's a very legitimate point of view. I mean, if it's going to be if we're going to go certainly past 1 year, then we need seriously to consider an interim hard fork. I think that's a very legitimate argument.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see what Monero developers do. I guess one thing that we skipped over, I want to ask ArticMine before we get off the call. I was reading all of the O.S.P.E.A.D docs by Rucknium, and it was interesting to me. In one of them, it says, almost verbatim, we should never make this public even after this bug is patched. So I'm interested to know what changed that the community decided that it's actually better to tell the world about
blunt,
this.
I would say, to be blunt, I think the reason is the reality that full chain membership proofs is coming down the pipeline.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's reasonable. It's very hard to decide decide when to make things public.
It's not an easy problem, but I would say that's what actually changed the dynamic.
Okay, and then I'll just say, in defense of Monero developers, Bitcoin developers are infamous for keeping bugs secret for, I think I saw one CVE that wasn't publicized for 8 years, and they basically wait until the old software is end of life and no one's using it. And that works well for like a remote crash or something like that. If there's a bug where someone can remotely crash your node, then okay, now when all those versions of the node are off the network, it's safe to tell the world. But they keep things secret for really long times as well. So 3.5 years is actually reasonable.
I'll share with you a case that was really, really interesting that happened in 2017. And what happened is the Monero developers uncovered a bug in all of CryptoNode. And it was a double spend bug. And so we had to do two things. First of all, we had to patch it in Monero, obfuscate the release of the patched Monero.
Which is an art of itself.
It is, yeah. And then responsibly disclose the bug to all the other crypto nodes.
Which is hard.
Which was about, I think, 10 coins or something like that.
And yeah, and a lot of them don't get along with each other. Some do, but
No,
some
no.
don't.
But here's the interesting part, and the story goes on this. Is this was a successful built on? There's a whole blog on, and then one of the coins, actually, the developers exploited the bug on their own coin.
Yeah.
So that was a really interesting, and it's funny because I was involved in it in a sort of an indirect way because I had I do a lot of the scaling of Monero. That's one of my main things that I work on. And there were significant scaling upgrades after Ring CT that had to be put in place. And that was the ostensive reason for the hard fork. But behind the scenes was this bunch.
Interesting.
So I mean, it's all on. You can go and get Monero and look at the whole story or the whole blogs on this one.
It's very funny and interesting how similar things play out in Monero world and Zcash world, because almost the same thing happened in Zcash world when the Sprout inflation bug was known privately. The Zcash disclosed it to a few of their friendly forks like Zen and I think a few others, but definitely not all, because Zcash has lots of forks too. And then it just kind of got dropped publicly in everyone's lap, and everyone had a hard decision to make.
Because we basically patched Monero first, and that was the decision. We patched first to Monero, and then we would disclose it to all of them.
Yeah, fix your own house first before you help the neighbor. That's very reasonable. I mean, I get that.
That's what we had to do. I mean, that's what we had to do.
So, Dan, I think I hope you're not running out of hard drive space or whatever.
No, I'm good on that, but I do have to go work on the well.
Yeah, you don't want to let the well go dry because it really messes up the motor. Well, I would say ArticMine, it was very enjoyable chatting with you. I learned some things. Hopefully we can be in contact more. So yeah, thanks for answering some things that were just challenging to find the answers to, so that it helped me. I hope we made a few, useful comments for just people just trying to use their, just daily privacy. And I am going to try to get this 2 wallet kind of recommendation. Obviously, everyone's going to have their own little take, like, oh yeah, 2 wallets, but do this, and 2 wallets, but X, do Y, X. But I think it's kind of a good platform of just, if you're going to do something different because of this, maybe here's some ideas. I'm not telling anyone this. I love
it. I love your idea.
Cool. All right. We'll talk more. I was very enjoyable and
thank you.
And illuminating chatting with you. Thanks for putting this together, Dan.
Thank you.
ArticMine, where can people get a hold of you?
My common one being Reddit, ArticMine on Reddit. I'm very common there. And you can contact me on Telegram and the ArticMine. I'm on Signal and the ArticMine. Those are kind of places you can reach me. And also the email articmine@getmonero.org. You can contact me there.
How about you, Duke? How can people get hold of you?
I'm nowhere. I write some stuff publicly at duke.hush.is. I don't really have all the social media and all that stuff, but if someone shouts into the void loud enough, they'll get a hold of me somehow.
And of course, I'm Danny. You can find me on Twitter at The Crypto Show and at DragonXChain. That's the best way to get a hold of me there. Also, my Telegram is at DragonXChain. That you can go there and see the community. Also, our marketplace, agorax.is. It is a copy of the Silk Road, and you can just go there and buy and sell as long as it's not illegal.
That's
cool. Great talking with you guys. We'll be in touch and have good luck with the well.
Okay, take care.
Bye.